Elon Musk has called Grok 4.5 an Opus-Class model. XAI's own benchmarks say something different. If you're paying for Claude, ChatGPT, or Grok right now, this comparison decides where your money should actually go. Grok 4.5 only wins half the benchmarks it was tested on. And there's one number in this release that's never actually been confirmed. In the next few minutes, the real price gap, the exact benchmarks it lost, and the unconfirmed number everyone's repeating as fact. On July 8, 2026, TextAI released Grok 4.5, and this one's different from every Grok before it. This isn't a general-purpose chatbot upgrade. It's the first Grok model built specifically for coding and agentic work. Instead of just answering a question, it goes and does the task for you, across dozens of steps on its own. Here's the backstory that makes this release make sense. Back in April 2026, Cursor, one of the most widely used AI coding editors on the planet, partnered with SpaceX to solve a compute bottleneck, tapping into XAI's massive Colossus infrastructure. Then in mid-June, SpaceX went further and acquired Cursor outright in a deal reportedly worth around $60 billion. Grok 4.5 is the first model born from that merger, co-trained directly on Cursor's own data. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what Cursor actually is. It's not just another code editor. It's become one of the default tools serious developers reach for when they want AI to write, debug, and refactor code alongside them. Not just suggest a line here and there, but actually work through a problem with you. When a company that size gets folded into XAI's infrastructure, it's not just a business transaction. It's XAI getting direct access to the exact kind of real-world coding data that shapes how well a model performs at real developer tasks. The messy, multi-step, this bug only shows up in production kind of work that's much harder to fake in a lab. Musk didn't hold back on the claim. In his own words, it is an Opus-Class model, but faster, more token-efficient, and lower cost. Then, in a follow-up post, he got more specific. Roughly comparable to Opus 4.7, but much faster. That's about as direct a challenge as you can throw at Anthropic. Musk isn't just saying Grok 4.5 is good, he's saying it's in the same league as one of the best coding models in the world, at a fraction of the price. And notice who he's comparing it to. Not GPT 5.5, not Gemini. Specifically Anthropic's Opus line, the model most professional developers already consider the gold standard for serious coding work. That's not a random comparison. That's a direct shot at the company currently seen as the leader in this exact category. That's a bold claim. So let's actually hold it up against the numbers XAI published themselves, because the full picture is a lot more interesting than the headline. Let's start with what's undeniably, verifiably true, the pricing. Grok 4.5 costs $2 per million input tokens and $6 per million output tokens. Compare that to Claude Opus 4.8, priced at $5 input and $25 output. Do the math, and Grok is roughly 3 times cheaper on input and over 4 times cheaper on output. Now here's where it gets more dramatic. XAI claims Grok 4.5 uses about 4.2 times fewer tokens than Opus 4.8 to solve the exact same coding task. Think about what that actually means. It's not just a lower price per token. It's using fewer tokens in total to get the job done. Stack those two numbers together, the lower price per token and the fewer tokens needed. And here's a real example. On one benchmark task, Opus 4.8 used around 67,000 output tokens to solve a problem. Grok 4.5 used under 16,000 tokens for a comparable task. At their respective prices, that means a task costing you close to $1.70 on Opus could cost you around 10 cents on Grok. That's not a small discount. That's a completely different cost category. Think of it like ordering the same meal at 2 restaurants. One charges you per ingredient and uses twice as many ingredients to make the same dish. The other uses half the ingredients and charges less for each one. You're not just getting a discount, you're getting a fundamentally cheaper way to cook the exact same meal. That's a massive efficiency claim. And if it's true, it changes how any serious coding team should think about their AI budget. But price and speed don't mean much if the model actually falls short on the work. So can it really compete? Here's where the story gets a lot more honest than the marketing. XAI published 4 head-to-head coding benchmarks comparing Grok 4.5 directly against Claude Opus 4.8. Grok 4.5 wins 2 of them, Deep CPUE 1.0, and Terminal Bench 2.1. It loses the other two, Deep CPUE 1.1 and CPUE Bench Pro. Here's why that split actually matters, not just the score. These aren't simple quiz-style tests. Deep SWE and SWE Bench Pro throw real, messy software engineering problems at a model, the kind pulled from actual open-source repositories where the fix isn't obvious and there's no single correct line to memorize. Terminal Bench, on the other hand, tests something narrower: how well a model operates inside a command line environment, running tools and scripts step by step. So when Grok 4.5 wins the terminal-based test but loses the harder, open-ended engineering ones, that tells you something specific. It's very strong at fast, structured execution, but it's not yet matching Opus on the hardest, most ambiguous real-world problems. That's not a clean sweep. That's a coin flip by xAI's own published numbers. And it gets more interesting when you bring in a neutral third party. Artificial Analysis, an independent AI evaluator with no stake in either company, ranks Grok 4.5 fourth overall on their intelligence index with a score of 54. Ahead of it, GPT 5.5 at 55, Claude Opus 4.8 at 56, and Anthropic's newest model, Fable 5, at 60. Sit with that ranking for a second. Fourth place isn't bad. It puts Grok 4.5 firmly in the top tier of every AI model on the planet right now. But fourth place also isn't Opus-Class in the way Musk framed it. It's close, it's respectable. It's genuinely impressive for how cheap it is. It's just not the thing being claimed. So when Musk says Opus-Class, the honest answer is close, genuinely close, but not quite there, and definitely not across the board. So if Grok 4.5 isn't the smartest model on the market, why is xAI betting this hard on it? The answer has almost nothing to do with intelligence. It's about something else entirely. And it's the part of this story most coverage is missing. xAI isn't trying to win the smartest model race with Grok 4.5. They're targeting a completely different metric: intelligence per dollar and intelligence per second. At 80 tokens per second, genuinely fast for a model this capable, and using a fraction of the tokens competitors need for the same task, Grok 4.5 is built for one specific audience: teams and developers running massive volumes of coding tasks, where cost per task matters more than squeezing out the last percentage point of benchmark accuracy. Think about it from a business's perspective. If you're running an AI agent that fixes thousands of small bugs a day across a huge code base, would you rather pay for the absolute smartest model on Earth? Or a model that's 90% as capable but 4 times cheaper and faster? For a lot of real companies, that's not even a hard question. It's the same logic as hiring for a factory floor versus hiring a surgeon. You don't need your most brilliant, most expensive expert bolting on the same part 1,000 times a day. You need someone fast, reliable, and affordable enough to run the line all day long. You save the surgeon for the one operation that actually needs a surgeon. But there's a catch worth knowing before you get too excited. Grok 4.5's memory actually shrank down to 500,000 tokens, less than half of what Grok 4.3 could hold. If your work depends on feeding an entire massive code base into one prompt at once, this upgrade might quietly do less than the model you're already using. And there's one more number floating around this release that nobody official has actually confirmed, and it's the number most headlines are leading with. You've probably seen headlines claiming Grok 4.5 runs on a 1.5 trillion parameter foundation model, internally called V9. Here's the honest truth. xAI has never officially published a parameter count for this model. That 1.5 trillion figure comes directly from Musk himself in public statements, not from any independently confirmed technical documentation or system card. Here's why this distinction matters more than it might seem. Parameter count used to be the single number everyone pointed to when comparing AI models. Bigger meant smarter, roughly speaking. But as the industry has matured, companies have gotten a lot more selective about which numbers they publish, especially when a bigger number doesn't necessarily translate to a bigger benchmark score. If Grok 4.5 truly does have 1.5 trillion parameters and still only ranks 4th on independent testing, that actually raises a more interesting question than the one most headlines are asking. It suggests raw size alone isn't the advantage it used to be, and how you train a model matters just as much as how big you make it. That doesn't mean the 1.5 trillion figure is false. It just means it's a claim, not a verified fact. And that distinction matters, especially if you're a creator, journalist, or developer, making real decisions or content based on this number. Always separate what a company's system card confirms from what its CEO says on social media. They're not automatically the same thing. So we've covered the price, the benchmarks, and the honesty gap around the specs. But there's a bigger question sitting underneath all of this. What does Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google actually do now that Grok is playing this game? Here's what history tells us about moments like this. When a new player undercuts the market on price while staying reasonably close on performance, the incumbents rarely ignore it. Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google have all shown, release after release, that they respond to competitive pressure by pushing out cheaper or faster tiers of their own models within months, not years. So don't be surprised if, in the coming weeks, you start seeing more aggressive pricing from Anthropic on lower-tier models, or OpenAI leaning harder into speed and cost efficiency in their own marketing. Grok 4.5 doesn't have to win outright to change the market. It just has to make cheap and fast a serious selling point that every other lab now has to answer for. This is speculation, to be clear. None of the other labs have announced a direct response yet, but it's a reasonable prediction based on how this industry has behaved every single time price pressure like this has shown up before. Now here's the part that actually matters most if you're deciding whether to switch. Where does this model genuinely make sense to use? For you specifically. Let's get practical and let's break this down by who you actually are, because the right answer is different depending on your situation. If you're a solo developer or indie hacker building your own product, running high volumes of repetitive coding tasks, fixing bugs, writing boilerplate, running agent loops across dozens of files, Grok 4.5's price and speed genuinely make it worth testing today. The math is hard to ignore. 4 times cheaper output, competitive results on at least half the benchmarks. For someone paying out of pocket every month, that difference adds up fast. If you're a startup CTO deciding what to build your product on top of, the calculation is a little more nuanced. You're not just thinking about today's cost, you're thinking about what happens when your usage scales 10 times over. A model that's 4 times cheaper per task becomes a genuinely different line item on your budget, once you're running millions of requests a month, not thousands. If you're on an enterprise engineering team working on the hardest, most open-ended problems, the kind where one wrong step wastes an hour of compute and real money, Anthropic's Fable 5 and Opus 4.8 still hold the performance ceiling. You're paying more, but for those tasks, the extra reliability can genuinely be worth the premium. And if you're in the European Union, this decision is on hold for you regardless. Grok 4.5 isn't available there yet at launch, with XAI targeting mid-July for European Union access. The most realistic strategy, and one a few serious engineering teams are already reportedly using, route your work. Send your hardest 10% of problems to a top-tier frontier model, and send the high-volume repetitive 90% to something like Grok 4.5. You get the best of both, top-tier reliability where it matters most, and dramatically lower costs everywhere else. Now, zoom out for a second, because this release says something bigger about where the entire AI industry is heading. For the last few years, the AI race was mostly about one thing: who has the smartest model? Bigger parameter counts, higher benchmark scores, more impressive demos. Grok 4.5 is a signal that a second race is fully kicked off, the efficiency war. It's not about being the smartest anymore. It's about who can deliver good enough intelligence at the lowest possible cost and the highest possible speed. This matters because it changes who can compete. You don't need billions of dollars in compute to build a company on top of AI anymore if models like this keep getting cheaper and faster. It also puts pressure on Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google. Because if a $2, $6 model can do 90% of the job a $5, $25 model does, a lot of businesses will simply choose cheaper, even if it's not the absolute best. And remember, this is also XAI training its own coding model on compute capacity it leases out to competitors like Anthropic and Google. That's an unusual, almost contradictory position to be in, helping power your rivals' models while racing to beat them with your own. So, let's bring this all together, because the real answer to Musk's claim isn't a simple yes or no. Is Grok 4.5 Opus-Class? Based on everything we've covered, it's close on raw intelligence, genuinely ahead on price and speed, and honestly behind on a couple of the hardest coding benchmarks. Musk's claim isn't a lie, but it's also not the full picture. It's marketing doing what marketing does, picking the framing that sounds the most impressive. The real headline isn't Grok beats Claude. It's Grok makes near-frontier AI dramatically cheaper. And that story matters just as much, maybe more, for anyone actually building with these tools day to day. So, Opus-Class or Opus-Cheap? Honestly, both. Musk's claim isn't a lie, but it's not the full picture either. Grok 4.5 wins on price and speed and splits the benchmarks down the middle. If this helped you cut through the hype, subscribe for more of these breakdowns and tell me in the comments, are you switching based on price or sticking with whichever model actually scores highest?